with more tips from the Speaker Hardware Shop. This time we're going to talk about being square. And I'm not talking about whether you're cool or not, I'm talking about whether your cabinets and your cuts are square. I'm going to show you some of the squares that I use here. I use a carpenter's framing square, I have these two nice aluminum squares, and then a small version of the carpenter's square. I end up using these two the most. These are really handy and convenient, but the problem with them is if you look, they're adjustable. So you have to check the square on them fairly regularly and tighten that screw down. And you can do that on the edge of your table saw because you know your table saw table is square. But as I end up using the framing square and this small framing square probably 80% of the time. I know they're always square. I do check them occasionally. You can re-square them if they get out. It's easier just to throw them away and buy another one. They're like 10 or 15 bucks a piece. And if you don't get square cuts on your cabs, you're going to have a hell of a time getting anything put together. Nothing is more frustrating than starting an assembly and it doesn't fit, it doesn't go, and it's because you got something out of square. Now I'm going to show you a really hard-learned lesson. This is a 5x5 sheet of 1/2-inch Baltic birch. Gorgeous plywood, wonderful to work with. About half the time when I buy them, they're out of square. This one's not too bad. This one's actually dead on the money, which is really helpful. But what happens is you'll get two edges that are parallel and the other two are not, and you have to measure to find your parallel edges. And when you make your rough cuts for your cabs, you want to leave at least 1/8 of an inch over, maybe 1/4 of an inch over, because you're going to have to go back in and re-square those panels. Now let's talk a little bit about the plywood itself. Baltic birch is what you should be building your boxes out of. And if you look at Baltic birch, look at the edge grain, you can see that the top ply is virtually the same thickness as every other ply. And that is exactly what you want when you're building speaker cabs. You can use MDF if you're building stuff for home, but if you're building speaker boxes to haul around for PA use or guitar cabs, you need to be using Baltic birch. And be careful when you go to the lumber yard, they have a product called birch cabinet plywood, but it's made in China, and that top ply is a paper-thin veneer. And when you glue things up, that paper-thin veneer will tear away. Whereas if you're using genuine Russian birch, that won't happen. So now let's go to the table saw and I'll show you how to square up an unsquare a panel. Okay, the first thing you want to do is pick a side and cut the other side. You want to make sure you have two parallel sides. I've got my fence set so that I'm probably only going to take a 32nd, maybe a 16th off of the width of this board. And that's just to make sure that these two edges are parallel. Okay, now that you've done that, you've got two parallel edges. Now you need a board that you know is square. And this is my squaring board, and if you look at it, see all the little bitty nail holes? I do this a lot because it's so much easier to make sure your cab is square when you put it together. So what you do is put your board right up against the fence, lay this one on it with some overhang off of that edge, and make sure that you've got some slack on this edge, because this is where you're going to make your cut. And in order to do this trick, you have to have a nailer. So then what we do is we just nail these two together. Make sure you hold everything flush. And turn and set your fence so that you're going to take just a little bit off of that board, a 1/16 to 1/8. But remember, you should have left some slack when you rough cut it. And now, this corner is square. Has to be, because this was square. That's how you square up and out a square board. You can also do this with a saw sled, which is a sled that you build that runs in your rails that has a square edge on the back side. That's a really good way to do it, especially if you have to do it a lot. This is a quick and dirty method that'll get you by. Thanks for watching.